Let's talk about Men.
I saw it last night
You
in
did
a
see
nice
it.
empty theater.
Okay, I saw it in a packed theater at the AMC Burbank 16. Men is directed by Alex Garland. It's and Alex, I really like his work. Um, and it stars Jessie Buckley as a woman. And I don't know how deep we should go into the story. I think we're going to be fairly spoiler free for the first half of this conversation, but we have to talk about spoilers. We have to talk about spoilers at some point. You will be warned about it. But basically, Jessie Buckley's marriage was falling apart. Her this is minor spoilerish, right? Because it comes out this all comes out within the first 30 minutes. And little by little, this unfolds. They don't tell all of this story right at the beginning, but she's in a lot of pain. Jessie Buckley's character, Harper, she rents an Airbnb out in the English countryside and just wants to get away from it all. And she encounters a lot of different men who all have the same face. And it's the face of the actor who he was in the very first episode of Black Mirror. He played the prime minister. And the actor's name is, Alan is going to go on IMDb right now, and he's going to find out the name of the actor. Because Alan's on top. Alan should always be 5 steps ahead of me, anticipating the needs of the show. He should anticipate the needs of the show. Because if he doesn't, he's going to be subjected to, I don't know, to a video like this.
I will destroy your ship.
Hey guys, who's the gay one in this again? Is it me? Am I the gay one? Wait, are you the gay one, Alan?
Okay, back to the Men
wow.
review. Back to the Men review. That's our little tribute to when we talk about Star Wars.
By the way, it's Rory Kinnear.
Yeah, Rory Kinnear is the actor who plays all of the men in the story. So when she arrives at the Airbnb, the caretaker is there giving her a tour, showing her this beautiful little almost large cottage in the middle of the English countryside, in the middle of nowhere. So she encounters him. She encounters a strange man as she goes to visit an ominous tunnel where she kind of just hears her own voice kind of echoing. It's right in the trailer. And then she encounters a naked man just standing in her garden of this little villa cottage thing, right? And she has to call the cops. All the people are this guy, Rory Kinnear. The cops, the naked man. She goes to a church and sees a vicar, and that's also played by Rory Kinnear. She encounters a little boy wearing a woman mask. And it's weird because the little boy looks like he's like 11 years old, but has Rory Kinnear's face, and he looks old, right? Very, very strange. But what we come to find out as she's encountering each of these men, and each of them have sort of a level of toxicity, right? Even the guy who's the caretaker from the Airbnb, who's really nice, but in a nice kind of condescending way. A lot of microaggressions from the caretaker. But each man kind of does something that is offensive. The vicar is trying to console her and puts his hand on her knee and then says some things that are very offensive to her. So each man kind of crosses a line with her in some in minor ways and some in very large ways, as she's just trying to heal her heart from her husband, who threatened to commit suicide and died tragically as he's falling. She sees him falling out of their apartment window. I don't want to go into details about that. That's a little spoilerish, but she's trying to heal her heart from her husband who died tragically. And she has some guilt about it. That's the setup for this thing. Where it goes where it goes is just bizarre. And I don't want to get into, we'll get into spoilers at some point, but Alan, on the plus side, the one thing I really like the tone of how the movie started, right? I was there. There's like some really good jump scares at a certain point. Like there's cheap jump scares in movies. There were some really good ones. Second is just the tone when she goes to encounter the tunnel, which you see in the trailer, is really intense, where she realizes there's a tiny person that she can't even tell exactly what they're doing. It could be something nefarious out in the distance. And that person starts running towards her and gives chase, so to speak. So the tone of the film I really love. And then things begin to escalate around the middle of the movie. But up until that point, like I'm in. This is like, it's moving. Also, the movie's like 90 minutes, which I love. But the first half of the movie is building towards something horrific, which no one could have guessed. We're not going to talk about it for the next few minutes because I want to get your impressions of, spoiler free, if you can, the first half of the movie. And I saw it with an audience that was packed. There were clearly A24 like super fans. Just anything A24 comes out, they want to just like, oh, we love A24. It's so weird. Everything is so weird. And I will say A24 has very good taste. A24 division of Warner Brothers. But what are your thoughts, Alan, on the first half of the movie?
First half of the movie, on the plus side and a very high plus, it's a beautiful movie. I just love the visual style of it, the production values, it is gorgeous, and I was absolutely sucked into it. The sound plays a big role in it. You have Jessie Buckley there. She's an accomplished singer, and her voice plays a big part in the film. And then it just gets weird. It gets really weird, and I think my feeling was, is this movie about the visuals of the film? There's this very strong horrific images, and after a while I felt like, is this what this movie is about? It is just presenting just presenting something incredibly strange. And then we get to the end, the message, and I'm like, okay.
Don't
I feel like
we shouldn't talk
the
about it
message
right
was
now.
kind of jammed in at the end to want to say something.
Well, we shouldn't talk about the ending just yet. I just want to talk
Yeah,
about the first half of the movie.
yeah,
But the
I
tone
just
is
made the
right
point
there.
of, yeah, I'm just making the point that I feel like the reason I'm here in the theater is for these horrific visual images versus anything else about the story.
Well, I mean, first of all, the creepy thing is Rory Kinnear is all of the men. That like
Mhm.
right off the bat. And you don't notice it right away. You're like, wait a sec, is that, and I didn't even notice it in the trailer. It was sort of like on second viewing in the trailer, it's like, oh wait, all of the men are one guy. And there's a scene where she goes to a bar or local pub, and all of the men are Rory Kinnear.
Yeah.
The guy behind the bar, he's got like a big beard. There's another guy that's sort of having a mullet haircut who looks like a hooligan. Like there's just like the bar is just filled with like Rory Kinnear looking dudes, but they all look, slight variations of him, right? I mean, that's unsettling to begin with. And then
Well,
the
the
whole
kid,
thing
the,
of
the
what's that?
kid version of him is unsettling. It's
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is. You just notice it, and it is very blatant at that point.
Well, because the kid version of him is not just like, 10, 11 years old and has his face, but is also like a complete asshole. Uh, and I've seen kids like that. They're just like, oh, that kid's just a dick. That kid is a dick, just wants to be cruel to people. Yeah. But every one of these characters is cruel to a degree. Even the guy who seems like the nicest guy, the guy who's the caretaker of the
Mhm.
Airbnb, who's he's really just sweet and nice, but it's like this little thing underneath, this sort of uh where he's just a little condescending about things. He's a little
Yeah.
dismissive, and it's like you don't see her roll her eyes, but you can feel that the audience should be rolling their eyes during some of the things that he says, right? Some of the what many might describe as microaggressions, right? Like
Mhm.
that's kind of that's kind of what his character is about. And each of them has a degree. The vicar is just interested in her sexually. He puts his hand on her knee. He's consoling her in a way. He you know ad, he admits that he's having fantasies about her. All these men are, you know, they're grotesque in a certain way, while she's having to deal with the death of her husband. And she has this friend that she talks to on the phone. Her friend, she'll sort of FaceTime her friend and, hey, look at this villa I'm in. And she's aware of her situation, trying to console her character, Harper, you know, and things just begin to escalate into ridiculousness, where the first half of the movie is like very subtle about what it's trying to say, and these like, all of these men are awful. And then it gets to the second half and things escalate. And I'm not sure if we want to get into the spoiler stuff right away. We can go to some of these comments
I
here
mean,
real.
I don't know if you want to talk about the messaging in a bit after you get through the comments, but that's an important thing.
Well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
And we're going to get to your comments after we finish here.
Yeah.
But and we'll give you a spoiler warning.
Well, let me just say this, that there
Yeah.
is a version of this on television, except the genders are swapped, and it's called the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial.
Yeah, that's Alan's attempt at humor. I think I need to show that video again and see if that works. But look, it gets to a point where in the second half of the movie the stakes are high, right?
Mhm.
Now I think we're going to get into spoiler territory. If you do not want to be spoiled on this movie, I'm going to give you a chance to dip out. Okay, I'm going to give you a chance to dip out. Okay, come back in like 10 minutes. We'll be done with spoilers. 3, 2, 1. Things take a turn and start to escalate. The naked man who basically chased her through the forest, which is also Rory Kinnear, now shows up at her house, is busted by the cops, taken away, and then let go the same day because they really had nothing to charge him with, right? He didn't do anything. So the naked man comes back and begins threatening her, and she calls her friend on the phone and says, I got to get out of here. This is crazy. There's a crazy naked man. And the cops won't do anything. And her friend says, I'll be there. It's 3 hours out. I'm going to drive. Give me your position. Give me your location and whatnot. And then suddenly all of the men and it gets gruesome because what's revealed is the way in which her husband died. This happens about the midway point of the movie. The way in which her husband died was they were in the middle of an argument. She wanted a divorce. He didn't want to get divorced, and he hits her. He
punches her.
He punches her. And she's like, get out. It's over. I never want to see you again. He threatens, I'm going to end myself. I'm going to end myself. We need to work this out. She has no interest in working it out. So we hear a story that he basically she locked all the doors, wouldn't let him in. The husband goes up to the apartment that's just above hers to try to go on the balcony and just like get into the apartment by jumping over the balcony. And he loses his footing and falls to his death. And you see his dead body, and it's horrific. It's mangled. It's caught on like an iron fence, and it's incredibly gruesome. I mean, I will say this might be, for this year, it's the most gruesome horror film I've ever seen. And there's no indication that it's going to be horrific in the trailer. The trailer is very subtle. It is incredibly gross. Like just beyond like the kind of stuff that you'd see in, your most over the top gory horror movies is in this movie. I'll describe some of it. And oddly enough, like, I know my last name is Gore. I don't particularly love gore in horror movies. I kind of like turn away, and there are a couple times I gasped and just had to like avert my eyes because it's just horrific, especially the husband's body. Yeah, I know. Fat Elvis
Yeah.
says, "Oh, come on, man." But no,
Yeah,
it's just
that knife scene, I couldn't watch that knife scene.
we'll talk about the knife
Yeah.
scene, but yeah, it's you know, it's it's
Yeah.
really over the top.
Yeah.
I wonder what your thoughts
I
are on the
think
gore.
the discussion is like narrowing toward this whole idea of toxic masculinity. And
Right.
and you kind of know it's coming just based on the trailer and the title of the movie. But when it plays out between Jessie Buckley's character and her husband, the what happens between the two of them. I mean, I've seen it in reverse in terms of gender swapping, that where the woman is the one who is wanting to keep the marriage going and threatens to kill herself if he goes through with the divorce. And it was at that point where I realized this is you know this is not necessarily male specific. And that's the thing that really started to bother me at this point about the movie, about at least the messaging of the movie is, this is not male specific at all.
Right. Well, it's what's interesting about it is so that the first half is all this setup with meeting all of these different male characters played by one actor. The second half of the film, or like the third act, turns into effectively it's like Halloween, right? It ends
Mhm.
up being a woman alone in a house being pursued by a threat, and all she has is a knife. What's interesting is, and I talked about this, I talked about this. We went out for drinks after and had to kind of process this movie because it was just so bizarre. But like, there's an axe in the film that you see, this axe that's sitting there, and it's like, oh, like her friend points out, like, oh, there's an axe behind you. I thought, well, as soon as you introduce the axe, it's just like, you know the thing about Chekhov's gun,
Yeah.
the theory of Chekhov's gun. When you introduce a gun into, whether it came from plays, right? If there's a gun that's introduced, it's going to get used in some form. That happens in movies. It's called Chekhov's gun. Look it up. I think this is Chekhov's axe. They introduced that
Hey,
there's an axe right by the fireplace. And as soon as you see the axe, you're like, oh, that's going to come into play, like
yeah.
something. And then, we'll talk about it when we get to the end, but there's something involving that axe in the end that's horrifying. When I sort of drew the, like, oh yeah, that's a thing. Um, you'll understand when we get there. So what ends up happening is she's in the house. She's the naked man that was released is now trying to get to her. He reaches through the mail slot in the front door. She takes the knife and stabs it through his arm, and then he pulls the knife back so it splits his hand into two, like his sort of forearm is now cut in two. And each version of the men that come after her, because all these versions start to attack her, they all have the same wounds and injuries as the one that was given to the original naked man. And this is the biggest spoiler. This is why people, and I was I was with the movie up until this point. To be clear, I was enjoying this movie. It's not as people in the chat are saying it's identity politics, it's woke, it's whatever. Not as much as you would think. Would you
Yeah.
agree, Alan?
Yeah. And quite frankly, you knew it coming in what this was about.
You knew
So
it coming in. You knew it coming in because of the title of the movie. I think that the technique of using Rory Kinnear as all of the men, I think really that works. It
mhm.
was unsettling. It was creepy. It was bizarre. So it's not as woke as you would think it would be based on how they set it up. Most of it is very subtle, but it is there. It is absolutely there. But each of the men that she's dealt with all begin to approach the house in some form, and they are trying to get her, right? So she's going from room to room. It's all this tension. She gets in a room, locks herself in that room. She thinks she's safe, and from another place another man is coming in. They end up having the same injury. But here, and this is the biggest spoiler of the movie, I'm going to say what the big spoiler is. Okay, I'm telling you what the big spoiler is. What ends up happening is all of these men begin to give birth to each other. A
How is that
vagina,
possible?
huh? This
How
is
is that possible?
I'm telling you, I never thought these words would escape my mouth. A vagina appears on these men, each of these men, and a whole human male is birthed from each previous version of that man. It is the grossest, weirdest, shocking thing, and it keeps going. I think it happens like 4 or 5 times, right?
It has to be more than that.
Maybe
It
more than
felt
that.
like it was going on
It's
forever.
and this is where people say they like the movie until the very end. It's this part where whole men, I mean, and it just happens. It looks like it's a practical effect. It's the grossest thing ever. You see this vagina appear, and then when it struck me, a derisive term for a woman's vagina is a hatchet wound. Have you ever heard that, Alan?
No, I haven't.
A hatchet wound, which comes from an axe. So she's holding the axe. This is, first of all, people in the chat are going nuts here.
Yeah, I know. We need to get to the chat.
All I'm doing is telling you what happened in the movie. So she's holding this axe, which I don't believe she ever actually uses, but a derisive term for a woman's vagina is hatchet wound. Okay. I just, this is something you may have seen it in a gas station bathroom. You may have heard that term.
Yeah.
So these whole men are being birthed from previous versions of each of the men, and they come out of their butt, out of their one, and when they come out of their mouth, you see 2 feet coming out of the mouth, and it is the most grotesque effect. And this is where the audience is gasping. It's weird. Spider Geronimo says axe wound. I've heard hatchet wound, axe wound, whatever. That's the climax of the movie. And then she has a conversation with a vision of her like dead husband. And the whole time I'm thinking, watching this movie,
you're getting really into spoilers here.
Well, this is I'm just spoiling the whole movie. I gave a spoiler warning. Okay. But it's so she kind of resolves her issue with her husband.
Excellent, yeah.
And then the friend shows up, and that's the end of the movie, and it's 90 minutes. But it's right up until like the movie had me when it turned into like it's almost a dissection or a autopsy, if you will, of the type of Jamie Lee Curtis Halloween type of stalker film. It's kind of like it's like an analysis of that genre. And then it just gets completely over the top. And there are some biblical analogies, at the beginning, she eats an apple from the tree. She takes an apple from the tree, and she's technically not supposed to do that, right? I mean, that's right out of the Bible. Like, so there's that, but the whole I saw it with a packed crowd, and they were like, you just heard and like at the end of the movie, people were like, what the fuck? But it was a real hipster crowd. I can just tell. I can't believe the AMC Burbank 16 is turning into the hipster theater in LA to go to. It's very disappointing to me. But
you should go where I go, because I was by myself.
Well, I like to see a movie with a crowd, because I want to see the crowd reaction. I want to see the crowd reaction.
Unfortunately, I don't have that choice. This is the nature of that movie theater I go to. It's in the boonies, and no one goes to it except me.
Yeah, it's just so over the top gory. It's to the point where, am I supposed to be laughing? Because it does get to the point of ridiculousness where each previous man births, and it like comes, it's gross. It just like, like a vagina appears, and it just like, I maybe shouldn't have done that with my hand, but it's like you can't believe it. Like, why? And then it keeps going to the point where like audiences were uncomfortably laughing. And that's the reason everybody says that this movie, I loved it up until the third act, because it is this like the sound design, Jessie Buckley's voice and her character Harper, like you're with her, like this tragedy with her husband. She feels guilt about it. She just wants to kind of heal herself. And she's encountering these men that, they're disrespectful and dismissive. They're not terrible men. They're not trying to do awful things, but that's the
thing that I kept thinking about was it just felt like this movie was about that scene, about these male births,
Right.
and it seemed like the rest of the movie kind of just was a reason to show us this. And and I will say I did love Harper, Jessie Buckley's character, her reaction at the end of it all as it was going on, because as it was going on and on and on, I felt like she was feeling the same way we were watching it. Just kind of like, are you kidding? Is this really happening?
Yeah,
And I think
yeah.
that's kind of the moment she kind of, you know, kind of gets herself together at
I
that
mean,
point. It's like,
it definitely feels a little pretentious, right? Like
mhm,
we're trying to say something very deep and meaningful about these men giving birth to other men, like in succession, not rapid succession, but as you're and she's just standing there watching it.
yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah. I
I
mean,
just
yeah, like I said, her reaction is the same as ours. This is ridiculous. And she kind of takes that attitude when it's over.
the thing is this, it's not as until you get to that point, I was like, "Oh, I like this. I like the sort of slow nature of it. It's each encounter with a different man kind of
Mhm.
escalates the stakes. They become more overtly toxic, so to speak.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I'll liken it to this. If I gave you a painting of a man giving birth to another man, that's this movie. And the movie is just basically providing backstory to this picture.
Well, I'll say this: if you follow my Twitter at that Chris Gore on the Twitter, I it's the only time I may ever have used the pregnant man emoji. I found a reason to use the pregnant man emoji. It's just like, uh, you know, what can I say?